Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Reigniting Main Street. I'm Laura Richards, and I'm here with Patrick Lee, CEO of Spark Business Institute. How you doing, Patrick?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm pretty excited to get into today's subject. We're going to be talking about some of the ways that urban sprawl has impacted our communities and ourselves. But before we get too much into it, I wanted to get you to tell us a little bit about Tom Hilton and how you came to learn of Save Our Land, Save Our Towns, his book, and what we can do to be protecting our cities, our towns, and our main streets.
Okay, so here is the book. Hopefully that's visible. And it's a very nice coffee table type book, very picturesque. And there's a PBS special that goes along with the book, and you can still buy the disc of that special. I have no idea where you would download it, but if you look him up, you can find it. He's a very interesting guy, and where I actually met him and sort of began to learn about this was about a decade ago. I was part of Queen Anne County, Maryland's planning process, and they had brought a bunch of citizens together, and were putting different committees together on different subjects about the county that were all going to create the plans for those different areas, bring them back together to create the main plan that would then be approved by, the county council. And when we all came together initially and met each other and began this process, the very first thing they did is he was sort of like the keynote speaker. He was there. He actually handed out a copy of his book to everybody, and he did about an hour and 15-minute presentation on Save Our Land, Save Our Towns. And it was immediately just grabbed you. It was something that you were like, wow, now this is impactful. If we were to take this and do something with it, we could see how it would make change. And everybody was excited about that. Fast forward a little bit, I was the executive director at Leadership Anne Arundel in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. And after seeing that, I had gone to the publisher of our local paper, and he was very much involved in the Leadership Anne Arundel organization. And I said, look, we've got to bring this concept to some of our classes. We've got to start sharing this. And he goes, okay, well, let's give it a shot. So we brought together one of the classes that were ongoing there, and brought a bunch of alumni back, and we had Tom come down and present again. And at the end of it, everybody was just excited. I mean, they were this is a great thing. So we started actually weaving him into the programming for every single one of the classes that we did, because it was such a unique approach, and it addressed everything. It didn't just address, how towns are laid out. It didn't just address the environmental piece. It addressed obesity, addressed mental health, it addressed civil society. It was just such a neat concept, and he presented it quite well.
And one of the things that I think is a cornerstone of his philosophy, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, is that he really believes that our quality of life has declined because of urban sprawl. And he feels like if we address that, we can fix a lot of the problems that we have in our communities. And like you said, from obesity to, everything else. And which really reminded me of the segment we did last week about community gardening. Who would think that starting community gardens would improve property values, lower obesity, improve the social, features in a community. But if you actually think about it, it does do all those things. And the reverse is true. When you create sprawl and you move things to suburban areas where people have to get in their car and drive, it naturally takes people away from those walking things and those social things and those ways of being a community that they had before. So I think that's an interesting parallel. But lots of us have become disillusioned with that accompanying lifestyle of having to get in your car and drive to the shopping center to go to the grocery store, to get gas, or to go to the bank, versus when you used to be able to walk down to your neighborhood or town or even small city main street to do those functions.
I think that's absolutely true. I think a lot of Americans are truly exhausted from what we perceive to be basically a throwaway culture. In our once great cities, in our towns, everything is disposable, right? Disposable and replaceable, and nothing is done for aesthetics. It's done for convenience almost, and so. Once beautiful landscapes have been ruined by development, ill-conceived development. I mean, you can develop and still maintain landscapes, and you can develop and still maintain the flavor and culture of an area. But sprawl has placed us in a place where development at all costs seems to be what happens, with not a lot of thought to long term on that, right? So we're all kind of tired of that, the constant driving, the ugliness, the sameness of everything, the feeling of isolation brought about by sprawl. And I think most folks want safe, green, walkable neighborhoods, and maybe not to have to be driving to every single spot that we have to go to in a given day.
Right. Exactly. So interestingly, Hilton's state is Pennsylvania, and he effectively demonstrated how you can work with the state to safely plan development guidelines. And what he found was actually the cost of living could be lowered. Some things are counterintuitive, you wouldn't necessarily think, but obviously preserving farms and forest land, that's something you would think, right? Less development, you could probably preserve more farms and forest land. Reviving our cities, protecting our environment, and providing more secure neighborhoods. When people are out in the community instead of elsewhere, that makes sense that neighborhoods would be safer. And providing equal opportunities for all kids were just some of those things that he was able to prove were possible through working with the state about controlling urban sprawl.
And so what this really is it's a concept that looks like this. He basically went and he spent about a year studying how forward-looking states from Vermont to Oregon and how they attacked some of this, and how they adopted some statewide planning guidelines to promote real communities instead of suburban sprawl. And what this basically boils down to is design your community so people don't have to get in a car. So put some green space within walking distance of, where people live. So when they need to get out, they can get out. There's a landscape there. It's beautiful. Put Main Street businesses within walking distance so that you can walk to get whatever you need, and make accessible the conveniences of society, libraries, government offices, the places, hospitals, the places we have to be, put them within walking distance of where people live. Don't put them 25 minutes away, right? Where you have to get in the car and go. Put sidewalks in place. So when you do exit and there's where you got to go, it's safe to walk and get there. It's easy to do, right? And so the whole concept is quite simple. We're going to make where people live walking communities. So that starts taking care of physical fitness. It starts taking care of health. It starts taking care of getting to know your neighbors. It's supporting local businesses. It's doing what we, of course, want, which is making Main Street the center of communities, right? And it translates to everything, because they also want the schools within walking distance. So now you're taking your kids and you're walking them to school, or they're walking to school. So they're learning this behavior, right? Your recreation is within walking distance. So you have less reason to get in cars. So pollution goes down, right? Parking is not as big an issue if folks choose not to even have a car. And it helps to do all sorts of things. It lowers the cost of living, as you said. It revives cities and puts emphasis on, property values and property within that zone, right? And it creates real communities. People see each other, they pass each other, they wave to each other, they interact. It goes back to that sense of what we see in those 1950s movies we've talked about before, where everybody knows everybody, right? And people are all doing things as a unit, not passing each other in driving vehicles, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the biggest roadblock to this, or at least one of them, is reversing 50 years of behavior of people leaning on their cars as their kitchens, their offices, their place to go between work, home, school, sports, whatever. And this fierce independence that owning a car kind of created. And one of the things that you and I talked about before we started the podcast that I think is really interesting is, what has COVID-19 in the last 12 months done to change our behavior? We've been seeing over for the last, 5 years and probably longer than that, the decline of shopping malls. People aren't going to malls in the same numbers that they once were, and they're not looking for that to be an experience. It used to be in the 1980s when I was a girl, you went to the mall for your recreation. That was, what are you doing today? I'm going to the mall,
Yeah.
That's where new was. That's where socialization was. So malls are kind of going away. And now we're seeing strip shopping centers where, 50% of the tenancy is empty. So, part of me wonders, can we lean into this at a time where we're naturally more at home, more walking, more wanting small experiences and small number of people to interact with, and that feeling of safety and security, which I think are all things that you get from staying local and hanging on Main Street. So that's just me throwing that out there for you. But before you answer that, I'd like you to answer it in tandem with this, which is, we've talked a lot about people reading this and being excited by it and understanding it and getting it. And we're talking about smart people that run, counties and states. Why hasn't it been made functional? Why don't we see progress? People are excited about it, they understand it, and they want to get behind it. Why hasn't it moved anywhere? And how do we do it? And could maybe the time be now?
Well, it's interesting because those two topics go really well together. And let's call it what it is. Overdevelopment benefits folks quickly, right? So the developer who takes a piece of property, builds it up, gets some tenants in there, makes a bunch of money, moves on to the next one. And we've seen this. We've seen that change. Like you were talking about the malls. At one time it was hard to get in the malls, right? To be in the mall was where you needed to be. Now the mall is almost giving away space just to put something in it, right? And you see that in on Main Street, right? When the mall started opening up outside of town, all the businesses on Main Street started closing down. So you see a movement, but it's a movement of short-term development. It's not sustainable. It's quick money, and I think. The thing that sort of stands out here is that people get intrigued by this intellectually, but our system is designed to reward folks for the quick buck. I mean, big projects, lots of money, get in, get out, without any real consideration of what it does to that community. And I mean, this is a whole nother topic, but you can look at, what happened in Detroit when GM decided it didn't want to be in Detroit anymore. I mean, you can look at how these things happen, but what we're talking about, I think, on the scale is this. Right now, with what's happened with COVID and all, we all know there's going to be a reset to commercial property. We all know that we've learned that maybe we don't need all that brick and mortar and overhead as a business. Maybe a lot of these businesses don't bring all of their employees back. Maybe they start to downsize on the amount of brick and mortar that they need, right? So one of the things that this whole thing revolves around is the idea that you're going to rebuild areas. You're not putting up new stuff. You're going in and revitalizing, right? You're bringing back to life the city blocks and the towns and the stuff that was dying, and you're making it thrive again. So, it's difficult to conceive, but what if there's a moratorium on new development? What if there's okay, let's revitalize and reuse what already exists. And in order for a new development to go up, does a old development have to come down? Does something that's not being used at full capacity and is an eyesore, does it need to come down? It's almost like if you're going to cut down a tree, do you have to plant a tree to replace it?
Sure.
Right. So if we took this less as the economic instant gratification and it became more of the economic sustainable communities version, do we have an opportunity right now to tackle that?
Right. And what we're talking about really are changes in public policy. So in order to accomplish that, there has to be an advocacy movement and support around it, and pressure to our government officials and so on.
And I think if we go back to my example of bringing Tom Hilton to all these different counties and to, folks who are influential, who are smart, and that they're impressed by it, right? But what essentially happened was it got a lot of press, right? A lot of people who are influential and all learned about it, and they got to talk about it. And so I'm sure there's an influence of that at some level, but that sort of PR push doesn't change policy. And when the policies are set up to favor certain types of things, if you get tax breaks for bringing a business in and building a new building and developing a piece of property, if all of the incentives are placed in a way that promotes that sort of behavior, just because we're talking about and like this idea doesn't mean we're going to do it. There has to be a concerted effort to say, okay, what changes would need to happen to incentivize this different behavior? And in all things that are adversarial, if something's benefiting somebody now, right, then they're going to try to protect that. And so it is a battle about common good, right, versus entrenched interests, and how do we solve that? And I think that, that's real interesting as we look at our entire partisan political system right now. It's like it makes you almost hopeless. But I think what is hopeful is the idea that there are answers. I mean, a lot of times we sit there and we have these conversations, we look at this stuff, and it's hard to come up with a solution. It feels hopeless. This is such a unique solution that's been proven to work. This has been implemented, and it has worked quite well. And it's something that catches the attention of decision makers and people who are influential. So when you've got something like that, it definitely seems like that is one of the answers that's worth chasing down. There seems to be a hope in moving that along.
Absolutely. And from just a Main Street's perspective, in terms of revitalizing Main Street, we talk about doing our business one small business at a time. We see that impact on Main Street. Every locally owned small business that comes in is one less empty place and one more step towards a vibrant Main Street. It is also true that a bigger effort like this, where we know we have the attention of local officials and legislation in the works to actually take care of that development, would put so much momentum behind any Main Street movement.
Yeah, I think where this idea has some legs is not necessarily that you take it to your government institutions and you say, see this book, we need to change things. I think this is more of that grassroots piece. I think this is more going out and showing all those owners on the street that you also own on, hey, have you ever heard of this? What about this idea? What about that? And then they start to see self-interest in it. Like, wow, if everybody was walking from the neighborhoods around to us, that only benefits us. So the personalized incentive for that community to understand what it means to be a sustainable, local, supporting economy, just getting these ideas out to them so they can begin to take that thought process in as they decide what makes sense for us. Because starting that local is the only way this thing goes anywhere. This is not something that national policy is all of a sudden going to revolve around. This is going to be like what Tom did in some of the towns up in Pennsylvania, where it was local advocacy that made things move along this direction.
That's right. So everybody check out Tom Hilton, Save Our Land, Save Our Towns. Learn more about how you can get involved with any civic groups and help your elected officials understand what the ramifications of sprawl actually are, if you are capable of doing so, and then act out in your own Main Street areas to support your local businesses. And if you are one, great.
Put the Save Our Land, Save Our Towns decal in your window.
Exactly. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Reimagining Main Street, an SBI podcast, and we'll see you back here next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.